Hello! I did a video on how to use the Speedy Stitcher sewing awl, or any sewing awl probably, and it ended up so shaky that the footage is unusable. Buddy, this is sharp. Your help needs to be very metered. So I've now done 2 stretches, one with copious explaining, one without. So now I want to do another. Give me just a moment here. Okay, I'm going to, now that I have a piece of Velcro that's the next one peeled off, and I believe that'll be the correct one. It'll be the same length as this. Yes, and here are the soft bits. Obviously, we have Kitty Help. Kitty Help needs to be careful because there is sharp things going to be happening. So I'm using little tiny strips of additional Gorilla Tape to do this. You might be able to tell, and I'm going to lift you down to look a little closer, that on the previous round, like before I started and realized I had this sewing awl, I poked holes with a nail and put wood behind it. And it turns out that with this system, with the sewing awl, it's not needed at all. You may also be wondering why I used so much tape and stuff, and that's because I actually, I do some pretty high-level sewing on regular fabric, and I know that these things will fray. This is woven plastic crap, and so just like if you, like, get a hole in your sock, it's going to keep growing and growing. Same kind of thing's likely with this. So the tape is like a hem, which is a way of sewing over raw fabric. Everything's Gorilla Glue and tarp, and that is because those are the recommended materials. Inside the back end of the sewing awl here, please buddy, don't sniff it, there's a spool with this thread stuff. I'm going to leave it in because I don't feel like fully re-threading it. But to set it up, if you needed to refill that spool, you'd do it. And then you'd feed it through this drilled hole here. I've wrapped it around. This pin is to have tension, so when you pull back, which you'll see how that works, it's not just unspooling the thread on you. It can actually create the tension that you need. And we can go ahead and start. I'm actually going to take my shoes off and do this in my socks. Alright, so I do have an injured toe and I may make ouchie noises over that. So the first step is to poke through all the layers here. Coming out the other side, I plan to then do another layer of just tape on the back to cover over all these stitches, but only after I'm sure I have everything the way I like it, and after I've done a test run. My stovepipe is a 4-inch stovepipe, and this is a standard size of stove jack, and so I'm a little bit worried that I might run into a situation where like the heat radiation may melt it, in which case I'll have to make a bigger self-made stove jack. Not looking forward to that. But if it works, I'm going to do a second row of stitching on each of these and then tape the back. So after the first stab through, and this is only the first time, you pull on the side that doesn't have the groove, and that will be the loose thread. It's a little stiff, but that's okay. Then, this is easier. So the instructions say to dispense, and there's a groove in this needle so it's really easy now to pull through. This is waxed thread. I can tell because the wax is coming off. The instructions say to dispense 5 inches. No, it says 3 inches more than the length of what you're trying to sew. I've done 3 inches and I barely had enough to finish. I've done 5 inches and I had enough to finish, but again, actually I didn't even have enough to finish with 3 inches. 5 inches, I did okay. So I'm going to do a considerable amount, maybe even double this time. So now that that is put through, I'm going to back the needle back out. How's my framing doing? Let's get this fully in frame, hey? Hold on. Back the needle back out here. And on this side, stab through for the next opening. Does take a bit of strength. And then as I pull back, the thread naturally loops on one side because this is designed well. So there's a loop just on one side. So I'm going to take this until it's tight, not loose anymore, and then I'm going to feed the open, oh geez, I'm not even in frame. Going to feed the open end of this thread through the loop that's naturally created when I back up the needle just a little bit. And then I'm going to back this out. Hi, Pippi. And I'm going to pull this tight. So we want to make sure that it's not creating loops on either side and it's just tight, because otherwise you end up with a really messy stitch. Each time you make a stitch, it's going to be needing a little bit more thread to continue. And you can just pull here, go through the loop. Inside this spindle is like a chuck of the drill. There's an extra wide opening where the thread goes through the inside of like the chuck of a drill. And the groove in the needle, as well as the groove on this, should line up when you put the needle in the chuck of the drill. And then this goes down over, you tighten it up. I'm going to take the next stitch, make sure I have my Velcro down. The reason I taped the Velcro, I'm going to really make sure your hand's not in the way of anything here. The reason I did that is because I was finding that if I didn't, it slid around a bit too much to result in nice straight Velcro. I didn't tape it here and I did okay, but that's skill. That's not like normal. So then you're going to pull on both sides again until there's no exposed loops. Boop, and continue. Again, make super sure your hand's clear. Back the needle out halfway. You see this loop in the thread. Put it through that loop, the loose end that we pulled through before. Yank it down and even up the tension. Hey, Bada. You're so too much help. You're helping so much that I wish you wouldn't. Yeah. Keeping the tensioner set up correctly is a little bit of a pain. I do kind of dispense a bit more than I need right away, just because it's nicer to not have to do it every single time. All right. The reason that the loop is created on the correct side is because that side doesn't have a groove, and so it catches in the hole that was just poked. Again, pull both strings, even that up so there's no loops sticking out, and go in for the next stitch. With the tape is basically these loops over the Velcro. That's basically a pin. Everything's too thick to pin it, so I just use little tape as pins. And because that's a pin, I want to, excuse me, I want to take it out before I pierce it. So there's another one, and I'm going to pull until there's no loops sticking out. And then I might move it a little bit so that we're lined up nice, but yeah, this tool is great for leather work, tarp work, piercing through anything super thick. Probably could work on shoes with it even. And it works on a very similar principle as a sewing machine does. I'm going to actually move this instead of just stop using it. And I'm going to put it down there. Again, making sure my fingers are super not near what I'm doing when I stab it through, because there's really no stopping the momentum at the moment that it breaks through that barrier. Pulling it back, making sure there's no loops. I want to mention that when you put this through, if you end up stabbing through this thread, this loose thread, you'll want to pull the needle the whole way back out and try again, because you don't want to get stuck on that other thread while you're stitching. It will really throw off the evenness of the stitches because you won't be able to draw this through and get the tension right. It'll be like caught through itself. So yet again, I'm going to pull this till there's no exposed loops. Pull back until the loop is evident which side it's going to be. Fish that through. Pull it back. Pull on each until there's no loops sticking. And I'm going to dispense more thread again. Just give myself some space to work with there. And then fix my loop again because that tension pulled my loop out. Yeah, this is a really, really nice tool. Genuinely do recommend it. I have it only because Uncle Rob got one for me years and years ago, and it had just been sitting in its packaging ever since. My bad. With pins, this happens too. There's starting to be a bow opening there because stitching them together pulls it tighter than pinning them together does. And so the tightness of that is moving any slack down the line. Don't worry about it. Just take out the pin before it's forcing things backwards, or move the tape pin substitute before it's forcing things back onto itself. Everything's hemmed. We haven't stabbed the thread. I didn't really get to show you how to thread this because it was already threaded this time, but maybe one of these times. I don't know. It's pretty easy to do, except that, here I'll show you. There is this deeper groove right here. So when I put the needle in, I made sure the deeper groove in the needle and the deeper groove in the chuck were together. When you're screwing metal to metal, always backwards screw first so you don't cross threads and strip your screw. And then that just tightens down like a drill chuck. I'm assuming that people working with leather and tarps and stuff like this are as likely to be familiar with a drill as not. And so that's what I'm comparing that to. There really isn't anything else to compare it to. It's a 4-prong holder that you put a small diameter thing in, and then the screw goes down over and it tightens and tightens it until there's really no slack. It's a nice design, and that's how a drill chuck works if you weren't aware. So I don't know how well you can see it, but there is starting to be an opening there. I'm again keeping my hand super clear. So after this stitch, I'm going to remove that tape made pin so that it doesn't fold back over itself as I'm working and so that I don't end up piercing it. Hi, Randall. Hold on. Ugh, there we go. Just stick it over there. Even it out so I have no loops sticking. Yeah. So that pulling back and making sure there's no loops is super important. I'm going to finish these last few off camera to not make this super long, and then I'll show you how I tie it off at the end. Hold on. Okay, I ended up with loops on the bottom, and I discovered that I can fix this by inching them forward very gently. I really don't want that slack in there, so I'm trying to get that moved up to where I was, but it's really, really good to be checking for slack on the back on every single stitch. Now, the truth of the matter is I have a little bit extra and I'm kind of wanting to turn the corner. But the way that you finish this is by pulling up and then fishing the loose end of this completely through and tying square knots with the loose end. I'll pull it a little bit so you get the idea. Just pull on it until you figure out which one's the loose end. I don't want to pull it the whole way through, so I'm watching, because once this is the whole way through, this is very permanent. Then you cut this, and you tie and tie and tie. Make a series of like 3 or 4 square knots, and then you should be good. You'll end up with a finished end, a bit like this, maybe a little less frayed. I am going to continue, so I'm going to pull that back through and be sizing things. When you're done, you don't want to store it with the needle out. There are openings, just like this needle's right here. There's room for one more needle. So there's a curved needle that it came with in this case, and a straight one. I took the straight one because it just seemed like what I'm always going to want, and I put that in here. This device was from my Uncle Rob as a gift, but I can almost 100% guarantee you that this came from Lehman's non-electric Amish catalog, which is an online catalog that you can look up. It's not so non-electric that it's paper only. It's LEHMAN''S, Lehman's non-electric, and it is a Amish catalog based out of Ohio, and they have all kinds of neat things like this. I'm sure you could get some brand of a sewing all for leather work just about anywhere. It did have instructions. It came with everything shown. The instructions were right in the bottom of it here. And it has part numbers for like replacing a needle and stuff like that. And part numbers for the thread and all that jazz. So, as well as assembly instructions. I will say that the fact that I have sewing experience made figuring this out easier. The instructions for how to use it weren't 100% clear, even for me. Of course, I usually rely on a sewing machine, or hand sewing is very different than using an awl like this. So I wanted to share, just because if I feel confused and I figure it out, then I want to share my learning process with you guys so that it makes it easier for anyone who's looking for it. I hope this did help. I hope to be out in my tent soon having fun. But, you know, I guess I'll see you maybe out with a hot tent. We'll see. But at any rate, take care, and I'll see you later. Bye.